So, welcome to today's webinar, and this is the first part of a three-part series for SOLIDWORKS Composer. This is presented by Hawkridge Systems, and it's all going to be defined around creating assembly instructions. This first webinar we're doing today is going to be focused on printable instructions, so that's going to be IKEA-style PDF manuals that we're going to output directly from Composer. And my name is Scott Woods, Product Manager for SOLIDWORKS Composer. So let's go ahead and just review real quick what we're commonly seeing in the workplace for as far as creating assembly instructions. So the top row here is basically saying that the way that assembly instructions are currently created is the 3D models are made in CAD. Those are then brought into a program such as Word and then saved as a PDF. How you get there is pretty cumbersome most of the time. It's pictures, screenshots, configurations. There's a lot of work to get that done, and it's not associative. When we introduce Composer, we're going from CAD to Composer to the document. So you see we're cutting out all the fat and all those time wasters and just streamlining the process and making it easy, simple, fast. Okay, so our agenda for today is we're going to do a SOLIDWORKS Composer overview, which we just did. Then we're going to go ahead and jump into Composer, break down a 3D model that was designed in a 3D CAD software. Then I'm going to take that, prep it for technical publications, which is basically defining color, position, selection, stuff like that, text. Putting it all together, just kind of wrapping it up in a nice package in order to be published out as a PDF, and then publishing out that controlled document as a PDF directly out of Composer. And keep in mind we're going from CAD, which is SOLIDWORKS, into SOLIDWORKS Composer, which is defining all of the technical publications, and then we're exporting that as a PDF. Now that PDF is still associative all the way back to the original CAD model because we design it in CAD, bring it in Composer, publish the PDF. If it ever changes in CAD, change it there, go into Composer, tell it to change, and then just republish out that PDF, and it streamlines and automates that process. Okay, so today is part 1, and then next Friday we're going to have part 2, and then the Friday after that will be part 3, and each webinar is going to get a little bit more technical. So today is all about printed assembly instructions. Next week is going to be more about animation, and then the week after is going to be more of the interactive website-based 3D kind of publications. Okay, so let's jump into Composer. So first off, I have a document that I've put together already. I'm going to go ahead and just show this and then shut it down, and we'll show how we actually do this from scratch. But basically what you're seeing here is a 3D model that has been exploded out, bill of materials have been added to it, balloons, and we can take something like this and easily do a step-by-step assembly instruction just by clicking on an item, telling it to go home. So once you explode it apart, you tell it to go back, and it automates or animates that process of it actually going back to its original location. You would save that as a step, select the next one, tell it to do the same thing, so on and so forth with all of these parts. You just tell them to go home, and then they assemble where they're supposed to go. This is just a real quick overview of that, and I'll go ahead and show that in more detail with the same model. So let me pop down here and just show the kind of marketing aspects of this as well. So again, we're still dealing with a 3D model. We just added things such as the opacity and the metals and detailed views and stuff like that. We can do cutaway views, a lot of things that you would expect that Composer would offer. Of course, it does a lot of the things that you see in SOLIDWORKS, but this is a tool that's not a CAD tool. And so you really don't want to be doing this sort of thing in SOLIDWORKS, because if your intent is to publish out an assembly document, you want to be able to do that without modifying your CAD design, which Composer gives you that. So you're able to pull in the model, do whatever you want with it without the risk of messing up the design whatsoever. So it segregates this operation, and it's much easier to work in. Okay, so let's go and shut that down. So here we have this template. This is just a simple template that I made in Composer. It streamlines a lot of things, such as my font size and my balloons and placement and camera angles, and I have this kind of a placeholder of text with an image in the background, and once it gets into the actual steps, the background image goes away because that's just for the cover image, and I have more text in here. Controls my page size, so when I print this, what it's actually printing to. So it's just an easy way to kind of get yourself a little head start when you go to start these projects. You're not starting from scratch every single time. So I need to bring my model into here. You can see I have no model in my tree. So I'm just going to go ahead and say open. And the trick here is you want to say open, and you want to go ahead and you want to say merge into the current document. I'm going to go and take an SMG file here. This is a SMG file that was extracted from SOLIDWORKS. So open in SOLIDWORKS, saved as an SMG file. Just makes it so easy to do that and then bring those into your template. I could have also navigated directly to the SOLIDWORKS assembly and used it. It would so to import, which probably is about as much time as I was talking there. But go ahead and turn on the, or just enable the model, and then update the view. And that's the trick here. When you're using a template, you need to activate the view. You can see there's no model active in this view because when we made the template, there was no model that existed. So now we have to go to assembly. You see that assembly that has been previously designed, and I enable it, and it pops in. And I just go ahead and update the view. And that way I can get a nice and easy start to this document. Now, I want to be able to make this look a little bit better, because for my assembly instruction, most of it I want it to be kind of, technical and not real marketing style. But for my cover image, I want that to be a little bit more marketing, just because this is what everybody's going to see it first, and it's going to kind of catch everybody's attention. So we take the model, and this is the model directly from SOLIDWORKS. Nothing has been done to it. And easiest way to kind of spice it up is if you go to Home, select by color, and then we go through and just select these individual colors. Let me try that one more time here. Select by color, this guy there. So this here, I can say, okay, well that is going to be aluminum or something like that. And if I say select by color, select like this guy here, and I can say, well, this guy is going to be metal brushed. And then I can go ahead and I can control the color of that too to get a little bit more defined and look like metal. Something like that. Now, any other parts in here, if you hit tab, you can tab through the model and you can actually expose these components so you know that you're actually selecting everything and you're making that selection that you want. So something like that. The shadows, ambient occlusion, reflections, all that stuff is controlled at the bottom of the properties right here. And basically we're saying that we have 3 light sources and we want to enable things like shadows. You can kind of see it's very subtle, but you can see the shadows enabling there. The reason why it's so subtle is just the options that I currently have set up, just to kind of control that. Okay, so let's say that we have a cover image. We want to do something like that. I'm going to go ahead and update the view. You can see the preview updates. Now let's say that we wanted to get a little bit more fancier with this. We want to do like a cutaway view. What I would do then is if you go to your author, create, and as you take this and you push it around the model, you can see how that arrow angle changes. And if you have any flat surfaces like that, you can go relative to that face. You can also just tell it to go top, right, left, bottom. But I like to kind of take it at a slight angle, just on a cylindrical face like this. It gives you a little bit more depth as far as when you actually go through and start cutting into it. Something like that. And let's go ahead and specify how we want this to look. So by default, it's capped, it's red. I'm going to leave it capped, but I'm going to keep the actor color, and then I want to go ahead and I want to hatch per actor here. That way I can just kind of head and define those a little bit more. Let's go ahead and just increase the angle. So something like that. All right, so that way we have each one has a different hatch, and they're keeping their colors, they're capped. That looks good. Now it's simply just go here and I'd go in here and just create a new view to save that, something like that. Let me drag it up and put it after there. Okay, so now we're getting into this step-by-step assembly instruction. So here, what the first thing that you want to do is you want to define what components that you're going to be moving. And I purposely took this model because it wasn't modeled in SOLIDWORKS. I got it off GrabCAD, and I'm not even sure what CAD program made it, but as you can see, it's actually been imported into SOLIDWORKS. So it has no assembly structure. It's just a ton of parts just dumped right there at the top level. And so this is the worst case scenario when you're bringing things into Composer, but it's still not difficult. So that's what I like to show here. Because if this was designed in SOLIDWORKS, you'd have all these sub-assemblies that are all nicely nested and maybe, you know, assemblies within there. You grab that sub-assembly, you tell it to explode out, you tell it to move around. Simple. You get in a situation like this where it's just vomited on the top. It takes a little bit more control, which we have here. So let's say that I wanted to create some kind of assembly instruction for this sub-assembly here. And typically you'd be able to click on this. This would be a sub-assembly in the tree, but since it wasn't designed in SOLIDWORKS, we don't have that. That's fine. We can take this, and also I want to keep in mind that the reason why we don't have a structure is not because it wasn't designed in SOLIDWORKS. It's because even if it wasn't designed in SOLIDWORKS and you bring that into Composer, you'll still have that structure. What happened with this model is it was probably saved as a step file or an IGES, and then it was imported into SOLIDWORKS, and then it was imported into Composer. And so somewhere along that line, it lost its history. I'm not sure at what stage, but just as a clarification there. Okay, so now and you also see it's not, yeah. Okay, so if I take this and I grab these models, something like that, so you can see when I drag my mouse from left to right, I have to actually put that box around a model to select it. So this makes selecting a little model like this pretty easy. If I just want to grab those nuts there, I can go ahead and do that. If I want to get the bolt with it, I could do that without selecting anything else. If I go from right to left, it's going to select anything that just nick like that. So in a case like this, I'd want to kind of do that. I get more than I probably want. Right-click, isolate. I can isolate those components. And now I say, okay, well, I got a lot of bolts in here that I really don't need for this assembly. And so in that case, now I would go from left to right, or right to left. Select those guys, and it's just H on your keyboard. It's a shortcut key for hide. And it's an easy way to go through, select these bolts without the fear of selecting something that you don't want to select, because keep in mind you have to put it in that box to actually make that selection, which just makes selecting more difficult and easier to define that selection. Okay, so something like that, and it looks like now I have exactly what I want. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to make a new step or a new view of this, and I'll see that every time I make a view, Composer is actually animating from step 1 to step 2. So just by doing that, I can go from, it's basically making an animation for me. And when I go into next week and the week after, we'll really be utilizing that to show how we can actually develop animation super easy. Okay, but for this instance, we're just doing the PDF. So let's go back to our assembly tree. Now I need to know what are these parts. So if I make a selection, it will highlight all these parts in the tree. Again, this doesn't help me too much in this model because it's just dumped up at the top. But now I can go ahead and use that to actually start creating what's called selection sets. So when I want to start pulling this model apart, I could just select it. I could go to my linear automated explode, and I could just do this, and I could automatically explode this guy apart, throw some build materials in there, call it good. In my opinion, this is for quick processes, but I wouldn't really use this exact step in practice because it doesn't really define exactly where you want these parts. We probably want to define that a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. But I just like to show that we can do that, especially if you're just trying to do something real quick. What I would do in most cases is use the translate tool. And again, by just kind of taking items, selecting them, moving them out, and let's go ahead and just take this guy, kind of move it out, something like that. Take this guy here, move it out here. And you'll see that as I make these selections, it selects it in the tree as well. So let's say we got these bolts, right? And again, I'm just going to go ahead and utilize that left to right box, grab all the heads of those bolts, and now I just have the bolts. So if I ever want at any time to grab all these bolts again, which is here in the tree, and I don't want to spend the time making that box, I can go ahead and I can make what's called that selection set. Now, if this was grouped in a subassembly, we don't need to make this selection set, but the way this is imported in, it helps us out later. And I'll just call those bolts for lack of a better, bolts 1 for lack of a better name. Now, at any given time, I can go back here, I can click that, I can grab those bolts without having to reselect them. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just drag them out, something like that. And so far I like the way this is exploding, so I'm going to take these items, I'm going to push it out a little bit further because I know I have more items to drag out. Now again, if you hit tab, you can hide parts, and we can just kind of peek and take a look at what's going on inside this model. So I know that I have, looks like a clutch here. So if I take this guy and I drag it out, I see that there's more parts to that clutch. Now, this is probably a sub-assembly process, and then now we're doing the main assembly. So for this scenario, I don't want to assemble this together. It's going to be pre-assembled. So in a case like this, if you're dragging out parts, it doesn't really even matter where you put them. So, I mean, seriously, you can kind of mess that up and make mistakes. And you're like, oh, you know, these 3 parts are actually a sub-assembly that needs to be pre-assembled before we get to this step. What you do is you grab all the parts except for one, you do a copy transformation, and you click on that part. Now what that does is it pushes everything back to that component. Now Composer isn't, because of the way that this tree is, or how this was imported, and it's not smart enough to know that those items go together, but it does know that they were touching each other or in relative location to each other before I started moving them. And I moved one, and I told the other ones, hey, move exactly the same way, ignores everything else I did to those models, and puts it directly in to that location. So this copy transformation is a lifesaver, and it makes creating technical documentation, assembly, process, operation manuals, it makes it super easy because you can make all these mistakes and you just click this button and it fixes it for you. I use it daily, hourly. It's great. Okay, so I'll show that a couple more times just to kind of clarify it too. All right, so we have that clutch that's been drug out. I always like to leave a main component stationary and have everything assembled to it. It just kind of cleans it up, makes it look a little bit better. Looks like we have some bearings in here. I'll go ahead and drag these out as well. You know what, might as well put this bearing, drag it backwards. So now that I drug that bearing backwards, all this other stuff, I probably want to drag it backwards as well. So again, the right to left selection, make the selections, drag it out like that. Looks like we have another disk here. I'm going to go ahead and just, same process, copy transformation, and just kind of mount it to that guy there. Take this guy, maybe drag it out. Oop, looks like there's a pin in there. Let's take this guy, drag it out. I'm going to hide that pin. I think I meant to hide that at the beginning, so I'm just going to hide it. And let's put this guy there as well. All right, we'll call this also a subassembly, something like that. All right, so now we get our components. Now we need to make build materials for these guys, because it's always a good idea to identify what you have before you actually start assembling them together. So Composer makes that super, super easy. For anything that's not a subassembly, I would just select like this, make a selection. If you wanted a identifier for each one, we can do that as well. I'm just showing another way to do it here. We have these guys here, which are all individual parts. I guess not this guy, so I'll deselect that. So that's not this guy either. Oh, we'll call that one part. Okay, so now we go to workshops, we go to build materials. Here, I'm going to go ahead and say compare exact. This is the easy way to do the automated ballooning and build materials, super easy. See, right now my BOM list is blank. So with those guys selected, I'm going to go ahead and just say generate IDs. Those generated, it's going to create the callouts. Callouts pop in there. Now, my default template is calling this out to be top and bottom for the placement of these, which works pretty good. A lot of times I'll kind of just jog them a little bit like that. I'm going to go ahead and delete this 5 because I know that points to that gasket that I don't really care about calling it right now. And I'm going to do a magnetic line just to take these guys, kind of adhere them to the line and allow me to show this exactly how I want it. Now this is nice to show too. You have a part that is coming off of the main, so we'll take that and we'll just drag it something like that. That way they don't cross over. Make that. Okay, so here's where Composer gets really cool. How we can actually use it to fix issues that should have been fixed in SOLIDWORKS, but they weren't fixed. Don't have to go back and do it. You can do it here. For instance, I have a subassembly that's not technically a subassembly. So let me go just select these components. So here are some components here that, let me just select them. And deselect that guy. Okay, so we got these parts, right? And I want these all in a subassembly. So what I would do is I would simply make a assembly group, and we'll call this I don't know, let's name it, I'll just leave it with the default name, doesn't really matter. Okay, so now I take these guys, deselect that line, and I'm just going to go ahead and move them to that assembly, like that. Now that's all part of a subassembly. It did go back to the beginning because that assembly didn't exist before. We can just drag it right back like it didn't matter. Okay, so now if I'm going to reposition where I had this guy. So now if I take, missing some bolts, there we go. So now if I go ahead and take this subassembly, I can go ahead and grab it like that. I've selected just that subassembly, and now I'm going to go ahead and say compare geometry exact, create a BOM ID for that guy, or I can come in here into the BOM IDs and say this is, you know, if I wanted this a special number like 100 because this is an assembly level, something like that, and then I would simply go create a call out. Now that call out's blank by default only because it's pointing at the parts, and the parts have no BOM IDs. So I want to go ahead, I want to just say the parent level is that guy there, and I can get the assembly level call out. So easy ways to make groupings and do assembly level BOM IDs that should have been defined before we get to the stage, but if they're not and you have no control over that, we can do that in Composer. So it makes life a lot easier. Okay, so I'm just going to make a step there. And a lot of times I'll make extra steps. I'll just go through and clean it up afterwards. They're almost like save locations too, so if you make a mistake, you can always go back and fix it. Okay, so here's my my parts. Most of them have the BOM IDs now. I go ahead and show that table. I can go ahead and move that table wherever I want just by setting it to free and just kind of sticking it into the corner or something like that. Oh, we can also control these columns too. So if you're coming in here, we can come in and actually control what meta properties and what data is actually in these columns here. You see by default it says description and BOM ID quantity. I can actually come in here, I can say, well, it's name, I want it to be called name, but it's still calling out referencing that BOM description. So by renaming them, you don't break that associativity, you just show it here, right? And it shows that different name there. Any meta properties that are developed in SOLIDWORKS, you can actually bring in and show them here. And I don't know, let's just say configuration. I bet all these are default. I just want to show that, oh, looks like, never mind. We actually have a couple that are not defined, or because I made that one in Composer, but all these other ones are default, and then there's special ones here. So that's actually good to know that in this particular assembly, some of these components are not referencing the default configuration. So it might be useful information. Okay, and then once we get to this stage, it's just a matter of telling everything to go back together. So at this point, I would do a little cleanup. Now I'd take these guys and say, well, you know, I made these, but I really don't need them. So I'm going to go ahead and delete them. And then you'll see that it will fix that animation. So it goes from here to here, as if all the other stuff never happened, because technically at this point, it didn't. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and make another step. I don't need the BOM table for this. I'm even going to hide the balloon. Sometimes you like to leave the balloons in there for the animation or for the step-by-step. That's fine. For this purpose, I'm just going to go ahead and remove them. Now, you'll see that there is a page space on here. There's actually a page border. So if I go through and I zoom in and I look at something like this and I put something off that page border, it technically does not exist anymore. It doesn't matter because we're going to be printing this as a PDF, which is a multi-page printable PDF document. Anything outside this page, that PDF isn't even going to know exists. So it's not like you have to hide those things. You can just zoom in, you can do your work here, kind of pan over, zoom out, and then when we print out this PDF, no one's going to know the difference. Again, just another way to make things a little bit easier. So what I want to do is I want to say that this is a sub-assembly that is then going to be assembled to this guy. So in any other application on the market, this would be really difficult to do because you would have to either mate these together, you'd have to eyeball them in and drag them, or you would have to tell them to go back home and then try to move them all at once and try to fake it. I've done this in the past. I've been doing assembly instructions for like 15 years, and there's a lot of little tricks to get that done, and none of them are efficient. Then Composer comes along, gives us a nice tool. that does it for us. So this copy transformation, I go back to that guy, and I say, okay, well, I want to assemble, let's say that, say this to that, that to this, and then all of that to here. So what I can do is I can go here, make sure I select that assembly. I'm going to say copy transformation, click that guy. It drags it. Let me go the other direction here. So I'm going to take this guy. I think those are two parts as well. Copy transformation, click that guy. That's going to drag it there. I'm then going to create a step of that. Take this guy. I'm going to box select just in case there's more parts there. And then I'm going to go say copy transformation, click here, create a step, and then select all of this. Say restore neutral position, and what that does is it puts it back to where it's supposed to be in the assembly. And that just assures that we have now assembled it into location where it's supposed to be. So when we move things like this, we don't have to worry about all the little things, the nodes, the annotations, all the authoring content, because we can always go back and add that afterwards. So I come back here, and I'll say, okay, well, you know what? I want to, first of all, identify what these parts are. So something like that. And I just called out the gear there because I didn't put a description for the assembly. So those are my parts that are going to now be assembled together. I go into that next step, and I could show those, bring those labels back in. For this reason, I don't need to. I'm just going to take arrow, point an arrow to here, something like that. Now I get asked all the time, well, why would you want an arrow there when you can obviously see it move into location? Kind of seems redundant. Well, if you think about it, we're actually going to be saving this as a printable PDF, and in this version of the output, nobody's going to be able to see that movement. The outputs that we're going to talk about next Friday and the Friday after that, they'll actually be able to see that, and you might not need the arrow. But for this reason, we like to put it in. So it's okay. That guy goes there. Now we come here. This guy goes there. So I'm going to go ahead and attach it as well. And something like that. Update that. And this is what I really like about the software, is it knows what I just did. It knows that I actually want to animate this, and this again, it goes into next week. That if I click this guy, it's going to make the arrow, it's going to show the arrow, and the arrow is going to move with it. You'll see it on this one too. Shows the arrow, moves with it, goes into the next, something like that, goes into location. And that's it. And then for these guys, you know, I do the same thing. I'm just going to go and do this real quick just because of time's sake here. We don't want to repeat too many things when we have about 45 minutes to present. But grab these guys just to show how easy this is. Restore neutral position, goes home. Create a step. And we're going to click these guys, restore, create a step. This guy, oh, I should have pushed this guy. This guy should have been installed way before this, but you know, whatever. It's just for demonstration purposes. What I'd want to do is do the same thing I did before, where I do a sub-assembly and then push it together and then assemble it, and it would work just fine. All right, and then create a step, and then we're going to go ahead and take this, restore, and I want to take these guys and make them a little bit closer because this guy's getting a little bit off screen. I just want to kind of identify what's happening here. We'll do that. And then for the last step, we'll take these, restore. You know what? We're going to get fancy with these guys too. We're going to take an arrow. We're going to take a label. We'll do what else? Go to our workshops. We actually have these. It's like a toolbox library, two-dimensional library that comes with the software. We come in here. We can say, you know, we're going to take a screwdriver, and we're going to take the screwdriver and attach it to something like that. So you know that you're not just sticking it in, you're actually screwing it in. And we'll create a step. Okay, just got a question that came in, so bear with me 1 second while I read it, just to make sure I get this answered before we move on. So the question is, can you add part numbers to the BOM? And what if the internal descriptions are not the best? Can you edit them to make more sense for an external audience? Absolutely. So what we do is when we're adding anything to the BOM, we have full control over what that is. And so you'll see too is if I go, let's go just real quick. Actually, before I show that, I just want to show how this animates that together. We'll get this last step with these guys going, something like that. Okay, so going back to the BOM, just to answer this question here. you'll see that this name is, these are, I think, French, right? So this was just some model I grabbed off GrabCAD, so I'm not sure where it came from. And so just keep that in mind, that if you didn't like these names, we could always change them. So what Composer is doing is it's looking at the part name, and then things like labels, things like the bill of materials, and I'll go ahead and show this here. So like this here, what it's calling out is it's saying, what is that labeled identifying? And right now it's identifying the tooltip, which just so happens to be the name of the part. But we can come in here and we can say, that we want it to reference any other level or any other property of this component. And so there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can go into SOLIDWORKS and we can do like custom properties. We can give it a name that we want for external uses, and then we can just reference that name here. Or we can come in here, we can just type in whatever we want. Preferably that's done at the SOLIDWORKS level, so we can kind of manage it better, and when we update Composer, it all updates. It also removes the ability to do a typo and misspell it here, but we can as well. I mean, everything is controllable. We just do a text string, and I can go ahead and say that this is a, test part or something, and then it will list it as such. And we can identify this in the bill of materials too. We can also come up here and we can rename them in the tree. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us a label, name of the actor that we can call it anywhere else. However, it still is pointing to, like when we update, that's not going to break the update. It's still going to have an internal ID number that tells it what part actually to update to. But we do have control over updating all that. So. Okay, hopefully that answers your question. I guess a short way to say this, yes, we have full control over what we're adding and how we're naming it. All right. So let's go just wrap this up here, and then we'll open it for questions. So we went ahead and assembled this whole assembly. Now we want to go ahead and put this, I guess, a sub-assembly. We want to go ahead and put it back to the main. So the easiest way to do that is typically just to activate the whole thing, to go back to a view that has everything, and then create a view. That way now we have the view that we left with as part of it, and we have the view that has everything, and we can easily do something like this. Go back here, say that we want to select all these components. I've selected these 2D items, but it doesn't matter because at this stage they're not shown anyway. I'll take this guy, drag it out, something like that. And then of course we have all this hardware that we want to then take, reposition, and push out in front of the model. Preferably, I would have taken all this hardware and made a selection set of it. So at this stage, I could just go ahead and select it without having to go through and do all this tedious selections. But in this case, we'll just go ahead and take these guys, maybe drag it out like that. Tell these guys that they need to. Actually, this isn't a bad way to show this. So go ahead and take this view, update it, take these guys, tell them to copy transformation, so they're going to be into location, maybe create a step, maybe take these guys, copy here, create a step. If you missed one, you just go back and grab it, copy it, and then update that step instead of creating a new one. Then we can take this whole assembly, restore neutral position because it knows where it needs to go, create that step, take these guys, restore, create the step. And it seems a little bit, tedious when you're doing it, but I mean, think about how easy that is, just to tell something where to go and then save that as a step. Tell something where to go, save it as a step. And you're doing like 80% of all the work that's needed. You can just go back through and clean it up a little bit. Add your bill of materials, add your callouts, add any arrows or any authoring content that you like. We can also add items. Well, first off, anything in this image library, and you can see these are just bitmaps. These are just images. So if you have any custom tools, you can dump it into this location, drag them in. But then also if you have any photos, So you have like a wiring harness you want to show, you can actually take a picture of that wiring harness and add it to Composer to really call it out. For things that aren't modeled, that really works well, even like adhesives and paints and stuff like that. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and just take a quick step back just to see this in action. I'm just going to go ahead and play. You'll see it actually animate that all together now. And again, we'll be able to utilize this animation next week, something like that. Okay, so now our assembly document, let's call it complete, at least for now. Keep in mind that when you publish anything out of Composer, it doesn't have to be complete. So what we can do is we can take a design that's, it's been working in engineering, it's 60% done. We can take that model, we can bring it into Composer, we can do all of this stuff. We can even output that document and just say, hey, this is preliminary, this isn't ready yet. As engineering goes through and actually finishes up the design, then you can update all the things that you did in Composer with the final design and just make, kind of get ahead of the game and start making this document before the models are ready. Opposed to the old way of doing it where you have to wait until everything is ready and now this thing needs to be shipped but we don't have any technical documentation for it. The customer's waiting for it. It's going to take us a week to make the documentation, but they would need it next week, and it it takes 8 days to ship it or whatever. And in such a scenario like that, the documentation is holding up delivery of the product. Where here we can jump in with that model, make all the changes that we need, make all the technical documentation that we need, and then just wrap it up at the end once it's complete. And that's as simple as a file, update, SOLIDWORKS document, point to the original, and it'll update everything you did. All right, but for this purpose, I'm going to go ahead and do a save as, print all views. And I'm going to go ahead and use a 3D or a PDF printer. And let's go into just the properties to make sure that we're landscape. Maybe the quality here, we'll turn that up to, I don't know, that's probably way too high, but we'll go ahead and use that. And it acts just like a printer, as if you're printing it to your desktop printer. But in this case, it's saving it as a PDF. This bullzip printer, this is one I just downloaded off download.com. Works great. I think Windows comes with it, or comes with a version that works good too. So you should have a PDF printer installed. If you don't, or if you don't like the one you have installed, I would recommend this bullzip. It's free and it works really well. All right, so here is my first page. You can see my background. Same with this guy too, and then we get into the step-by-step assembly instruction. Now, keep in mind the whole purpose of Composer is to reduce the text, reduce the language translations. We don't want to, have all this on the side. This is step one and has a paragraph of things to do. I mean, you can do that. You can add as much text as you want into Composer, but I just try to show demonstrations and teach everybody to try to get away from that, because if you're shipping this, for every word that you need to translate to a different language, it's upward of 6 to 10 cents per word, depending on what language you're going into. And then on top of that, nobody likes to read all that stuff. And honestly, who actually does read all that stuff? You buy something from the store, you go to assemble it. I mean, if you're anything like me, I look at the pictures, I try to put together, and then if I run into any snags, I go back and I read. So really, you only have to have you only have to call out in text things that are really unique and hard to do and you can't really show with the picture, and that's where the text comes into play. Or we can show that with animation, and that is a lead into my presentation I'm going to do 10 o'clock next Friday. So with that said, let's go back to this guy and just do a slight recap and we'll wrap it up. If there's any questions, go ahead and ask now, and if there's no questions, I'll be ending this session in about 5 minutes, but we can keep this going as long as you guys want, as long as you have questions. So again, next Friday, September 18th, is going to be the assembly instructions part 2. It's going to be based off of video animation. So taking this stuff, creating animations that we can then take into videos, put on our website, put on DVD, whatever you want. Very, very useful stuff. And then the last assembly webinar here will be of interactive content, and that's going to be more of the, you're going to take a mobile device and rotate it and stuff like that. So also some fun stuff. All right, so with that said, If you guys have any questions, please ask now. And let me pull this last guy up. And I'll go ahead and just keep this open for a few minutes and just make sure that all your questions are answered. Okay, just had a question come in saying, is there a way to insert page numbers to views that update automatically? Yes and no. Within Composer, we'd have to, in the template, you can do that. So you can actually set up a template with so many pages, and they could be pre-labeled, and you just dump stuff into it. And that's the way to do it. If there's any more pages that you need to develop that aren't in the template, you just would number those per page. Another way to do this, and one way I didn't show here, but I will show next week, is we can actually take all of these steps that we did, and instead of publish as a PDF, we would actually go ahead and publish this as a bunch of images or even video content, bring those into a program such as Word or InDesign, or even make a website out of it. And in that case, what we can do is we can actually use that to automate the page numbers and everything. So, if you're using, let's say, Microsoft Word, and you're taking all the imagery out of here, and we're linking that into Word, not embedding it, but linking it. So when it updates in SOLIDWORKS, it updates in Composer, it actually will update in the Word document, and that will all be lined up with the individual images with the pages associated with the document. So there are ways to do it. The way that I showed it today, there's no automated way to do that, but there are definitely ways to get around that. So. There's another question came in, says, is there integration with PowerPoint? Well, integration, no. We would, well, yes, I guess. It doesn't know what you're doing. It doesn't care that what other program you're using. But how you integrate Composer with other programs, such as PowerPoint, would be, all these steps of the process we made today, just like I was saying with the Word doc, those images would be saved out of Composer, and then those images would then be linked into PowerPoint. And the way that that workflow goes is you update your CAD models, you go into Composer, you tell it to update, everything updates. There's a single button press that takes all your steps and saves that out as a bunch of images. It will actually overwrite any images you had saved in the past. Now, since PowerPoint is linked to that, or your website is linked to that, or Word is linked to that, then it automatically updates as well. So we can automate the linkage between your PowerPoint presentation and SOLIDWORKS, no problem. But it doesn't have to be PowerPoint. It doesn't have to be any other application. It just has to be a program that accepts linking to images. And there's a couple ways we can show that. And again, that's something I'm going to go over next week.